Today is Monday, January 30th, 2023. We are recording an interview for an oral history project led by David Contreras to document Hispanic and Latino community leaders and influential Houstonians. Today's interview is with Mitch Contreras, and we are recording at the Leonel Castillo Community Center in Houston, Texas. Thank you so much for being here today. Let's start. Can you tell me your full name, including any middle names?
Mitch Contreras.
And when were you born?
And December 30th, 1949.
And birthplace?
Houston, Texas.
Were you named after anyone in particular?
Well, my dad's name is Carlos, and Mitchell, it was a derivation of Michael, and in the 50s there was a movement, especially through LULAC, to assimilate, and so using American names was important to my parents.
So let's talk about your family, your parents. Can you tell me a little bit about them and that history? Where are they from? What are their names?
Yeah, my dad was Carlos Richard Contreras, and my mom was Ruth Lotta Aguia Contreras. My mom's original name was not, I forget right now, Ninfa. And after I was born, I think she changed it to Ruth. And this was part of the philosophy in the 1950s that to become more Americanized. And they were both born in Houston, Texas. My grandparents, two of my grandfathers were born in Mexico. My grandfather from my dad's side was from San Luis Potosí, and I believe Narcisio Aguia, my mom's dad, was from Mexico City, and he might have come from Potosí too, San Luis too. And my grandmothers were born in the United States. I think one in Laredo and one in San Antonio.
So deep Texas roots
Yeah.
in Mexico.
Yeah.
Okay.
As a matter of fact, on my dad's side, we had an Uncle Sam, Simon, who fought in World War I.
Oh wow, yes,
Yeah.
that's right. I do remember that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So tell me a little bit more about your parents. I've never met them, right? Their personalities, do they speak, I'm assuming they spoke English in the home or Spanish?
Well, we basically spoke English. Again, like I was saying, in the 50s, there was the movement for assimilation, trying to be as American as you can be. And so on my mom's side, her brothers were LULAC, both brothers. Ernest Aguia and Leon Aguia, both were members of LULAC. And her dad was a Mason, so he was always traveling around since he was 32nd degree Mason. So they were kind of active in the community in some way or another. And my mom, I think she went up to the 9th grade, and she went to work for a while. And my dad was a high school graduate and went to college, and then he was drafted, and then he came out and finished up his college, and he got a degree in engineering, mechanical engineering. And so my dad worked several kinds of jobs. I remember he was a printer for a while, and then from printing he became a draftsman, and then he became an engineer after the Civil Rights Act was passed, because in those days they were hiring minorities as professionals. You know, that's one of the reasons that LULAC was very active in Houston, because they wouldn't hire Hispanic police officers or firemen or anybody in a lot of the jobs in the city. So, but my dad finally got a job as an engineer, and both my mom and dad were very strong advocates of education. They wanted us to go to college. They wanted us to do the best we could. So, and because of that, we first lived out in this area. As a matter of fact, out here in the north side, we grew up. I went to Holy Name, And then we moved out to around the Little York airline area, which is just north of here, which was because of the GI Bill. There was money that came out in '57 and allowed a lot of the GIs from World War II to buy homes. And so we went to parochial school basically until I got past the 8th grade. Then I went to a public school, St. Jacinta High School. And that's where I graduated.
Do you know what the draw was for Little York area? What was it, land or was it?
It was what was happening was they were building a lot of homes for the GIs. There was money that was passed that allowed the veterans to buy homes, and a lot of farmland was being purchased to accommodate the soldiers, the veterans, and so it all went north. The land that was available was up north.
Okay.
And so we went I went to Assumption Church, Assumption School there, and it was like you had people from names like Bolomovich, Andrisky, hardly any Hispanics out there. We actually had some people from the Ukraine back in the '60s who were there. So it was like a United Nations, so to speak, and the land basically was Canino's farm. It was converted to housing, and I remember our park that was out there used to be a farm, and they would have rows of on the ground, and we had a hard time playing baseball because of that, because it was still farmland.
So, going back to talking about your parents, you said your mom worked for just a short time. Do you remember what she did?
Well, basically, I was working at the store as a clerk or something of that nature, salesperson. And then after my parents got together and got married, she stayed at home and took care of us, you know. And she seemed to be, she knew a lot of stuff. She would make her tables, and I remember during the time of Davy Crockett, she would convert some of her fur coats into make caps for us and stuff like that.
Oh, wow.
She was very creative like that. Yeah.
Do you know how they met?
Pardon?
Do you know how your parents met?
Well, I found out later that their brothers and sisters were friends. You know, I mean, they like one of my uncles used to box with my other uncle on my mom's side, so they knew each other throughout the time, and they lived probably less than a mile away from each other throughout the whole thing. So I'm assuming that that's how they met. You know,
in Northside.
Yeah, and it was like around the Washington Boulevard and Henderson area, or Silver Street, around that area. It's now what they call the New Heights or something. Henderson Heights, you know, some nice term they have right now. Yeah.
So tell me a little bit more about their political views and you growing up around that.
My dad was fairly conservative, and he would have books that would talk about the fear of communism. He was many a times, you know, he talked about Americanism, the importance of being an American. He didn't at the time, because his dad was a blacksmith and a businessman. He didn't think very kindly to unions, and you know, he thought that you had to stand on your own 2 feet. Even like during the time of protests, whether it was the black movement or the immigration stuff that was going on, he felt that it was that a lot of the protesting and all was un-American, because he thought that if you didn't believe in it, you have to pass laws to change things. You know, he knew that there was wrong. You know, he realized that there was a lot of wrong going on, but he says you got to do it the right way. You don't go and protest and destroy and do things like that. You know, but he taught us that we needed to respect authority, police officers, respect people in charge, and if we didn't like what was going on, to do it the right way, make the changes the right way.
Do you know if that perspective came from personal experience of discrimination, or was it witnessing that kind of thing, or where do you think that came from?
Well, my dad experienced discrimination, and throughout, his career. However, he felt that there were the right ways of addressing it and the wrong ways, and he believed that a lot of the protesting that went on was more communist. I mean, the trend in the 60s, you would hear, and especially when I started working, that you would hear that people who you respected would say, well, Martin Luther King was being manipulated by the communists, and Cesar Chavez was being used by the communists, and things of that nature. And of course, that scared a lot of people. And another thing too that was in the 60s, companies would not hire you if you had any affiliation with the Communist Party. So if you were going to become a chemist, engineer, or anything professional where you relied on corporate America for your career, you couldn't associate yourself with the communists. And so, so you had to, whatever measures you took in order to address the issues of discrimination had to be through maybe proposing legislation or supporting people who would support legislation to make changes.
Were these conversations that you had in the home with your father, or did he kind of set an example, or was it he directly kind of talking to you about these things?
Well, when I was in high school, I got involved in debate and
Okay.
Making speeches and stuff like that, speech competition. And so I would come home with ideas that I would listen to from other students in the competition, and my dad would get probably upset with me if I was too liberal in my conversations. And he would tell me right off the bat, you need to respect your elders, you need to respect authority. I remember one time when we lived out on Airline Little Yard area, we would go, going down Airline, we would go over an overpass, and down below was a black community. And I made a comment one time saying that every time we come over, I'm always seeing the blacks, spread eagle, being inspected or searched by the police. And I thought, this is nothing but a police state. Well, my dad got very upset with me because of that, because that's the way it was in the 50s, in the 60s, that people were so afraid of communism that they took that approach about it.
Did your mother also have similar views?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, and it's and I think what's happened over the years, they've always been Democrats, and of course you got to realize in the state of Texas, the fact that you were a Democrat was probably because of the Civil War, and it had nothing to do with whether you were really for discrimination or for integration. It was part of the politics that's been there for years. But my parents were Democrats, staunch Democrats. My mom, I remember the first time my mom had to decide not to vote Democrat was during the Carter election in 1980 when he was running against Reagan. And John Anderson was running as a third-party candidate. And I remember my mom saying, I cannot vote Republican. I can't vote for Carter because of, I think, the way he handled the Joe Torres Campos situation. And so she voted for John Anderson. And that was the only time, I know that she didn't vote Democrat. But John F. Kennedy really changed the dynamics for us. It's for the Hispanic community. He recognized the Hispanic community, and that was a big thing because everybody ignored us before. You know, but that was the first time that we were recognized.
Are there any, I'm sorry. So we've talked about political views. I want to ask about religion in the home. What kind of environment was that for you?
Well, we were brought up Catholic, and even though, like my mom, I think took special lessons before I was born, because at first they got married before JP, from what I understand, and then they got married, had the blessed afterwards. And I think she may have to have gone through some instruction. And her brothers were Catholic, but I'm thinking that my grandfather, or my mom's dad, wasn't Catholic, or he was a naturalist, or he had some other type of beliefs that were different. And we were brought up in a Catholic environment, and then it was pretty strong until I guess I was in high school and college. It kind of waned after that. But we still practice our Catholic faith. And a lot of us, my brothers and sisters, are not all Catholic. They have their own beliefs, and we just fine, you know.
Who do you think you're most like, your mother or your father?
Probably both. I know, both my parents were very smart. I mean, they read a lot. They also were very encouraging. And so it's, you know, when Hillary Clinton said it takes a village, she was right on the mark, because a lot of the contributions to what I know and my ambitions were from my mom, my dad, uncles. Ernest Seguia, he's the one that got us involved in LULAC, and interest in politics, interest in how government functioned. It was a combination of the family that really encouraged. And a lot of times, oddly enough, it was institutions like the church that were the negatives to a lot of things. And but our family was very supportive, very supportive.
So you said that both parents are from Houston. Do you know what drew them to Houston, for example, instead of San Antonio or instead of another major city in Texas?
I'm not really sure. I know, like in the case of my grandfather, there was a blacksmith. They were coming here for opportunities, you know, and I think like any other group who come into this country, they're looking for opportunities. And what motivated them to come all the way to Houston, I don't know. And I think one of the disadvantages we had was that my dad was the youngest of his family, and so by the time I got to talk to my grandparents, I was like 10 years old, and you don't have deep discussions with your grandparents. You know, and it's not until you hit in your 50s and 60s that you start realizing that there's you begin to wonder about their motivations. You know, what drove them, what was their character, what they were really thinking. And when you're young, you don't think about that at all.
Did most of your family, aunts, uncles, cousins, all live in the same area? Like, did you all start in Northside together and then all move to Little York together, or did you separate?
At the very beginning, we were fairly close to the Washington Boulevard.
Oh, that's right, I'm sorry.
and State Street and Henderson area. And then as like the GI Bill did a lot about spreading us out, you know, like some went from living around this area to El Dorado, which is off of Wallsfield Road in 610 area. We moved out north part of Houston, away from downtown. So the GI Bill did a lot of good in one way, but a lot of bad as far as keeping the family close. And so that's what happens when you have growth. You have economic development. It causes people to expand out.
So at what age did you move out to Little York? How old were you when you moved?
Well, we lived around around this area, around Lorraine and Chapman and North Main area, since I was born to 57. Yeah, in 1957 we moved out north, and everything was kind of new because there was a new high school, Sam Houston High School, moved from downtown to Irvington, and then we had homes that were being built out there, and there were old homes established east of Harding Railroad area, but west, the west part of Houston was starting to grow off of. It was back then. It wasn't I-45. It was Highway 75. It was, and it wasn't even complete to Dallas yet. You know, there were still parts that you had to make some diversions.
So you were 8 years old at the time?
I was 7 years old when we moved up to the north side. Right.
Do you remember how you felt about moving? Was it?
Well, excited because even before we moved up north, my parents were looking for homes. Like, for example, the home we lived on, 2412 Terry, is now dilapidated. And we have pictures of my parents there. And I can remember, you know, what we used to do and see, like Perry Como, you know, and different things we would see. And at that time, Mickey Mouse Club was just starting up, you know. And so, but that was up to 1957, and after that we moved on. And of course, there was a lot of excitement. There were changes, you know, the fact that we had a new home and it was brand new and, and that kind of thing.
So, if you were to take me on a tour of your childhood, having moved, where would you take me? What places were important to you growing up?
Well, in the earlier years, of course, just down the street. That wouldn't take long because we lived basically on Chapman Street and near Lorraine and even Terry Street. I didn't realize that till I was looking at my birth certificate. And we were around that general area, and as a matter of fact, some of my uncles lived in that general area too, on Cochran and off of North Main and that area. And so that would be easy because we didn't move much until we go to, after 1957, we moved up north to Little York and Airline. And that was basically all white area on the west part of Hardy Road. It was basically all white out there.
Was that something that struck you as a child, or did you notice? Did you feel anything about it?
Well, that would let you know. I mean, it wasn't unusual to be called poncho or to be like, I remember even second grade, we had a play we had on for Thanksgiving, and I was a designated Hispanic or Mexican, you know, and so I never thought of going to drama because I knew I would be typecast because of that. But anyway, that's the way it was. You were the Hispanic, and even at our parochial school at Assumption, I think there was, we were the Hispanic, and then there was another family who were Indian, Native American, I should say, and then people from Ukraine, and it was like a little United Nations. We even had a Kubiak, related to the coach. Yeah.
Did that, how did that impact you, that experience?
Well, I think the positive part is that it began to give you an insight of other people's thinking and how to maneuver into, let's say, the white world. Because I see a big difference, like, for example, a lot of the people who lived in just an Hispanic area, that they have a different way of looking at things versus the white people. Like, it wasn't unusual for people like people in North Side or North Airline, Little York, to come up after a while saying, "You're different. You don't think like those people." And it's because you assimilate as much as you can, and you try to survive in that kind of an environment. So you have a different philosophy. I think that's why Obama did so well as president, because he knew what other people were thinking. He wasn't just set in just the black community area. He knew what other people were thinking too, what their perspective was. And I think that's important. And I think that's what I gained from living there. In spite of all the negatives of discrimination and all, you also got an insight as to what motivates these people, what they see, how they perceive, and how they can actually feel endangered by some of the things they don't understand.
Did that realization happen as a child, or did it come later?
Over the years, I mean, it evolves. You begin to realize that other people's perspectives are important. That it's not only one-sided. You try to understand why. It's more important to me to find out why people think a certain way. Why somebody doesn't necessarily agree with you. It's not because they're bad. It's just that they have a different way of looking at things. They come from just a different angle. And so once you realize that, you begin to understand and probably become more compassionate or understanding. Have a little bit more empathy for their thinking.
So can you, you've mentioned a few schools, but I want to make sure I get it down. Can you list all of the schools that you've attended?
Okay, yeah. Holy Name was first grade.
Okay.
And during that time, it was mostly, I think, still Italian. Mostly and then I went to Durkee Elementary because we couldn't get into Assumption right away when we moved out. It was Airline, Little York, and then we went to Assumption, and then I went to, after I graduated from Assumption, went to St. Jacinto High School downtown,
Sorry. So San Jacinto High School was downtown. What was
Sam Houston was close by. I went there because I had cousins going there.
Okay.
St. Jacinto at the time was a combination, what do they call it, academic, and you also had where you learned skills. I forget what they call it right now, but like printing and mechanics and stuff like that. But I went ahead and enrolled in the academic, and part of the deal was I was supposed to go to, was enrolled at St. Thomas High School, but my parents couldn't afford it, so I decided to just enroll at St. Jacinto High School. And so I took all the courses I was supposed to take at St. Thomas, and I took it at St. Jacinto High School. And basically what drove me there was I had cousins out there.
What was that commute like?
Well, it wasn't too bad. My dad worked from out there to downtown. He, I think at Dow Chemical one time and some other engineering firms, because it wasn't unusual for me to to take a bus from San Jacinto High School to downtown to wait for him until he got out of work. So I did my homework then. And so it was, I mean, it was an ordeal, but being young, you didn't think about it, you just did it.
So tell me about a little bit more about your experience at that high school.
It was quite interesting because I got into speech very early. I found out that I could speak in front of people, and it was interesting. I liked the competition, like in debate. And I know the parochial school I went to before was very good because they would make you make oral reports, book reports, put on plays, sometimes write your own plays and stuff, and perform it in front of your classmates. And so they got you out of, at least being up there and doing things. And so that intrigued me. And so I got into competition, speech competition for about 3.5 years.
What was the demographic of that school?
Pardon?
The demographic of that school?
Well, at the time, they were just starting to, like there were a lot of Hispanics out there because it was vocational as well. There were quite Hispanics, but there weren't any blacks at the time till I think I was in a sophomore, because it started at 9th grade. San Jacinto High School started at 9th. When I was in 10th grade, there was freedom of choice. That was the way I was able to get in. And then they started voluntarily integrating. And that's when it seemed to me that 5% of the top blacks and other groups were coming in. And so it started integrating there. And then right at the end, forced busing started coming in. And a lot of bad things happened, like you lost your teachers. A lot of teachers were going to Sharpstown at the time, Madison, Baytown. They were getting out of that area. And so we lost a lot of good teachers. And then thank God I was already starting college by that time. There was a lot of violence going on because of forced busing. Whether it was here or even Sam Houston High School, there was a lot of issues coming up dealing with students being forced to go to other schools.
Did you witness anything in particular?
Not me. No. Like I said, I was in college at that time.
Okay.
I had graduated, and many of the black students that I graduated with were like in the top 5%. They were the ones who were trying to get. San Jacinto at the time was a premier school, and it was like Lamar High School at the time, and they were had a good reputation. So you had people wanting to go there to get those teachers, learn to get Latin and calculus and stuff like that. So, but when I got out of school, that's when it seemed like all the controversy really got worse.
How did you feel about what was happening?
Well, I really can't say because I wasn't in the middle of it. Now, my wife and my sisters were at Sam Houston, and like my sister told me, she literally had to hide in the locker because of the violence going on. I mean, it got really bad. But as far as me personally, I didn't witness it. And I understand before I started at the University of Houston, there were actually a lot of riots going on at the U of H. And by the time I got there, it was pretty well settled out.
So, in high school, tell me a little bit about, I guess what was your plan? Did you already know in high school what you wanted to do? What were your goals at that time?
Well, it was either being a doctor or a lawyer. And of course, in speech, they would teach you how to. It would have mock congressional hearings and stuff like that. So it was either being a doctor, lawyer, or congressman, something of that nature was in the work, and also with having a dad who was an engineer going into science, so those were the things that were open, and so I took chemistry and math and different sciences to prepare me for that.
Did your father kind of encourage you to go in one way or the other, or was he pretty open?
He was pretty open because except when it came to political thinking. No, but he encouraged us to learn. Of course, my mom was concerned that whatever you do, it better be a degree that you can earn money with. Meaning that engineering or something of that nature, where you can go to work and raise a family, so that you can stand on your 2 feet.
Did you have any sort of creative or athletic outlets at school, or any hobbies of that nature?
Well, I found out real quick I wasn't very good at baseball or football. No, but most of it was the dealing with speech and research, when we had a project in biology, for example, and my mom had experienced some medical issues, and so I did some research on her heart condition, and so I would interview her doctor and do some research in the library. So doing research was one of the good things that I like to do,
Yeah.
and so I would take courses like physiology and things like that would help me out, in the sciences.
Who were your sort of, did you have mentors outside of the family, or idols, or anything like that?
Well, my mom idolized her brother, Ernest again, and he was a real mentor when it came to knowing about community issues, politics, and things of that nature. When my brother and I joined LULAC, and sister too, we would help out some of the candidates running, and they happened to be LULAC members too. But I remember we were helping Felix Salazar when he was running for state representative in '65, and we would go out and hand out information to the potential voters, and he was very good at that. But we had a lot of family. Like when I was competing in debate, we'd have to go and buy suits, and of course we'd have to go to places like Soul Stimbles where they would sell reused suits, or sort of like. And my uncle, who was a fireman and also a tailor, would fit my suits, or and so it was always a family affair type of thing.
Was that Leon?
Leon, yeah. It was, the family supported everybody's efforts, and so so as far as mentors, I mean, there was always somebody that knew something, and that could help you out on that.
So we haven't talked about siblings. Can you tell me how many siblings are in your family, and where are you in that list?
Well, I'm we have 8, and I'm the first. I'm the oldest, and so I have 3 brothers and 4 sisters, and being the oldest, and my youngest brother is about almost 16 years younger than I. Yeah, and do you want the names too?
Yeah, let's get it on record.
Well, David
is
David Contreras, and then Tommy Contreras and Russell Contreras are the 3 brothers, and then Patricia Ann Contreras Martin, and Kathy Romero, Christine Kahn, and Veronica Jobson are my sisters. And they were all very motivated too by my parents to go to school and towards their career.
Growing up, can you describe just sort of a typical day with siblings? Did you all do chores? Did you share a room? That was just a lot of people. What was that like?
In spite of the fact that there was new housing, because of the, when we moved in '57, my dad had not gotten the engineering jobs yet, so he was still struggling. And so we were 4 and 4, and there were 3 bedrooms, and so my parents had a bedroom, and there were 4 girls and 4 boys, and so, and luckily with the guys, some of them, we didn't have, let's see, when we moved at their new house, we had 6.
Okay.
And then we had 2 additional after that. So, we were lucky that we didn't have to really expand that much. But we were in pretty tight quarters. When I went into basic training, I thought I was in heaven because I had my own bed and everything, my own locker, and there was a lot of room. In spite of the fact being in barracks with other guys, still a lot more room.
As the eldest, what were your duties at the house? What were you responsible for?
Well, it depended. We would find ourselves hanging up clothes, and we had, before dryers, we had environmentally safe ways of drying our clothes, and we would do that sometimes, and then we would, because the floors were wooden floors, we'd have to wax the floors and stuff like that. And but that was, I don't think we were overworked at all. I mean, we might have done some yard work and stuff like that, pulling weeds, like you normally had to do, but I don't think it was servile work that we actually did. And we'd have to do dishes and stuff like that, but nothing I thought was that took too much. Because again, our parents pushed us to study. And so when we went to parochial school, we'd come home with a lot of homework, a lot of books. And so studies was the #1 thing.
Did you study at home, or did you go to a library or anything like that?
Well, when we went to parochial school, it was at home. Yeah, we would have to do math and all that kind of stuff, all that kind of homework. But that was the important thing, doing our homework.
So tell me about life after high school. What happens? You graduate?
Yeah, and I graduated a semester early because I went to summer school a lot.
Oh, okay.
I went to Jeff Davis High School a few times, and we. So I got enrolled in the spring of '68 at the U of H, and I decided to go into chemistry. And so what I remember, Vietnam was starting to really start up. And what I remember is the professors telling us that half of us won't be there next year. We'll be in Vietnam. I think they were trying to encourage us in a crazy way to study hard. But that was over our heads all the time. We were always concerned that we would make good enough grades to stay in the college. Yeah, so.
Can you explain that for possibly anyone who sees this later? What do you mean by that?
Well, the Vietnam War started getting more fierce, and a lot of people were being drafted. And because I entered in college, I had to, you got your draft card and everything else once you turned 18. You had to apply for a deferral where you can go into college, and I had one. And so, but you had to have so many hours per semester. You had to make good grades. If you flunked out, you were 1A. Otherwise, you were 2S. Was a classification for being a student. And so that was over your head all the time. So you would really have to make sure that you made at least D's to stay in. Otherwise, you'd be kicked out. And the people who did make it would end up being drafted. And it wasn't, I know I was very lucky because back in those days, public, like University of Houston, the tuitions were high, but not that high. And I was lucky that by the time I was a sophomore, I was able to go into the co-op program where you can work one semester and then go to school. And back then, I got a job with the light company as a lab, they called it co-op chemist in a water lab, where I made $2.12 an hour, and I thought I was in hog heaven. Because, you know, I was used to working for $1 an hour, and as a pumping gas, you know, as a high schooler and stuff. And so to get $2.12, I thought I was in hog heaven, and so I saved enough money, so I started paying for my own. Then I even earned enough money to put that. My dad helped with paying half on a car, so we were able to. But thanks to the co-op program at the U of H, I was able to finance my education. And by the time I was a junior and senior, I had gotten a lot of moral support from my bosses because I stayed at the light company at co-op. So by the time I graduated in May of '72, they automatically put me in as an assistant chemist. And so I got employed in June 1st after I graduated. And then I was able to get into a reserve unit in the U.S. Air Force Reserve Unit at Ellington. And I still remember Captain Cruz was the guy that recruited me. And I was able to get in. I mean, it was like you know, that you were blessed because I walked in and there was a 6-month OJT, which meant that you just had to be active for 6 months, and then you just were reserved afterwards. So I was able to join at the last minute. They came up, and so I signed up on that because after I got through with my active duty, I was back in grad school. I got into grad school for a degree in trying to get a master's in chemistry. And I was in grad school till '78. I got into law school in '78, so I gave up getting a master's in chemistry and went to law school after that.
So I want to back up. How did you, what was the motive for, or reasoning behind going into the Air Force? What happened?
Well, the draft.
Oh, you were drafted.
Oh,
you were, okay.
As a matter of fact, I got
okay.
my draft notice after I was in basic training in the Air Force, yeah. The Vietnam War was still going on.
Yeah, you were,
yeah.
okay.
And so, but it was waning down because by the time I got into the Air Force, the training wasn't as intensive. When I reported to active duty, a lot of the training that you had to go through wasn't there. They couldn't afford fuel. I was hired on as an medical administrative clerk, and we were supposed to get on planes and fly, and we had to simulate going down, and like my job as administrator was to do manifest for the pilots, where we were going, who was flying. Tagging bodies, you know, things of that nature. We were trained to go in as sort of like a MASH unit, you know, and pick up bodies and stuff like that. And we couldn't do any of that because there was no money. Congress didn't appropriate, and of course, there was also the fuel shortage going on at that time in the 70s. We were having problems with OPEC, and they didn't want to produce, or the cost of oil would have been way up, that kind of thing. So our military really waned a lot because of that situation. And so by the time I got into the Air Force Reserves, all of the training was gone. I think the only time I handled and M16 was during basic training.
Mm-hmm.
And after that, I never held a gun again.
What were you doing instead?
Well, I got it when I went into the first time, or when I was in active duty at Ellington. I was at the clinic, and we would handle files. People would come in, and the doctors would see the regular Air Force people because of colds, or their children would be there, or would come in, and they would have to be examined by the doctors and stuff. And then afterwards, I went into regulations part, where we would look at all the regulations that came out dealing with the medical part of the Air Force. And then I got into actually scheduling surgeries for retired people.
Okay.
So we scheduled them at Lackland Air Force Base or places like that. So, and then after I got through with active duty, they put me in a MASH group where we would have to monitor the training of all the medical technicians who would have to learn how to deal with medical issues like nursing and the nursing assistants. And we had to train these people, and so I got into the training program. And I was very lucky. I was under a major and a colonel, a lieutenant colonel, who was the head of a hospital in Louisiana, and then a vice president of First City Bank in Beaumont. And so they were always teaching me things about management, and like OMBs, like management by objectives and things like that. They were always imparting their information about budgeting. I mean, it was,
wow. Yeah.
It wasn't part of my training, but because of their knowledge and all, they always, those were like some of the mentors that were there. So it was quite interesting.
And so you were in active duty 72?
In 1972, and then I got out in OJT was 6 months.
Okay.
So I was by February of 73, I was already in grad school and back to my old job at the light company as a lab, as a chemist.
So your assignment with the Air Force, was that based on the degree that you had gotten, or was it, how did that happen?
Well, it was a job that I signed up for.
You signed up, okay.
And the crazy thing is, I was surprised as heck that I passed my physical. Because when I was young, I had pneumonia, my lungs were all messed up, I was flat-footed, overweight, and I passed in 72. So I was really surprised by that. And so, and at the time, I already had 3 years of college under my belt. And they didn't talk at all about officer training at all. So by the time I signed up, when I was on active duty, I had a captain come up to me and ask me if I wanted to go to officer training. By that time, I was too upset with the military to even consider it. And then too, I had a job already lined up and had other things I wanted to do.
Can you expand on being upset with the military?
What's that?
Can you expand on you just said you were upset?
Well, I mean,
with
they had the opportunity to get me at first. I mean, had they offered it at the very beginning, that'd probably been something I would have considered. But they, by that time, I knew, especially with all the politics going on, it was that my being drafted eventually, even after I was in the reserves, was that they needed cannon fodder. I mean, that's the way I considered it, and that they didn't care who they sent out there, they were going to do that. And then later on, there's been books about McNamara's people that he was trying to get to go there who were low IQ type of individuals. You begin to realize that that's all it was cannon fodder by that time. They didn't care who they were sending out there. So that wasn't too much of a motivation to go into the military.
Well, coming up on an hour, and I want to kind of wrap up. We've been talking about family and childhood. Are there any major sort of moments in your childhood, favorite memories, or that stand out that you'd like to share?
Well, you know, it all, at my age, it all amalgamates into one thing. You know, you just know that there were a lot of contributions to it, failures, as well as successes that plays a part, you know, of your character. And I now can look back and laugh at the fact that I, you know, couldn't hit a home run or, you know, things of that nature, and realize that I wouldn't have made a good offensive line guard, or, you know, it's just what it is, you know. So, but you know that you learn something from it, whether it was a camaraderie of being with other people trying to work towards a goal, you know. So you just know that it played a positive part, you know, overall.
Well, thank you. This concludes what will be part one
Okay.
of our interview.
All right.
And we'll schedule another interview. Thank you so much for your time.
Okay, sounds good.